Merci Sainte-Ginette du Zoom de nous permettre de nous retrouver comme cela et de nous voir tous. Bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être ici. C'est un grand plaisir aussi, une grande émotion de vous voir, de vous revoir et de réfléchir avec vous. C'est une séance que j'introduirai très brièvement en remerciant d'abord les deux paires de mains, d'yeux et d'oreilles de l'ombre, celle de Ginette Miranda, qui est l'experte Zoom, qui est extrêmement modeste. Ginette est étudiante de maîtrise au département de français à l'université de Victoria. Elle travaille sur les traductions en espagnol de, de l'album Astérix en Hispanie, qui se moque des Espagnols, enfin, qui se moque de ce que les Français pensent des Espagnols. Elle est aussi traductrice et interprète. Je la remercie infiniment. Et je la remercie d'autant plus que quand vous ne voyez rien, quand vous n'entendez rien, quand tout va bien, ça veut dire que Ginette est derrière et que elle a tout arrangé. La deuxième personne que je voudrais remercier, c'est Emmanuel Éric, mon collègue au département de français, pour encore quelques mois sur le papier. Il a toujours le sourire depuis qu'il a quitté le département. C'est étrange, hein. Et il l'a quitté au très bon moment, en avril 2020, au moment où nous passions en ligne. Emmanuel Éric est linguiste. Il parle un nombre de langues qui, chaque fois que je le rencontre, augmente. Il est écrivain aussi. Vous l'entendrez si vous écoutez l'interprétation en français de la conférence d'Ellen King. Il est aussi traducteur et interprète assermenté pour le Canada, avec le programme d'Ottawa. Et il a accepté extrêmement généreusement d'intervenir pour cette conférence en me disant que, bien sûr, c'était quelque chose qu'il pouvait faire, comme si c'était rien. Il a fait de la traduction française de l'excellente conférence d'Ellen King un bijou. Et je regrette de devoir rester sur l'anglais pour enregistrer et de ne pas pouvoir en profiter lorsqu'il la donnera. Donc, je voulais que nous reconnaissions le travail de l'ombre de nos deux médiateurs, Ginette et Emmanuel, sans qui cette conférence n'arriverait pas comme elle va arriver. Je tiens, en ouvrant cette séance, à remercier avec respect le peuple Lekwungen qui accueille l'université de Victoria sur ses territoires traditionnels, ainsi que les nations Esquimalt et Sanghees, dont les longues relations avec ce lieu n'ont pas cessé. We acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the university stands and the Sanghees, Esquimalt and Sanch people whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Je vous remercie tous et toutes et je remercie particulièrement Ellen King pour sa présence. Ses livres ont été une inspiration depuis que je les connais et je les connais depuis que je connais Anne-France Morand. Donc, merci à vous tous et toutes. Ginette, je ne t'entends pas.
Oui, 2 minutes, je commence la présentation tout de suite. Je vous partage mon écran d'abord. D'accord. Good morning, everybody. I will give you a few tips to use the simultaneous interpretation feature on Zoom. First, to ensure the quality of the interpretation, we kindly ask you to mute the notifications of your device and to mute your microphone. Then, to listen to the interpretation, click on the globe located on the lower right side of the Zoom platform and choose the language in which you want to listen to the conference. This is a picture of the Zoom platform. The globe is located on the lower right side of your platform here. Here is the drop-down menu where you will find the available languages for this conference, for instance, English and French. To stop interpretation and listen to the original audio, you just need to click off. If you have any question, you can write your questions on the chat window, or you can raise your virtual hand on Zoom. Thank you. Hélène?
Oui, merci Sainte-Ginette. Pas plus de temps dans les introductions. Anne-France, je te laisse prendre la scène.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. It is a great honor to present Prof. Helen King, Professor Emerita of Classical Studies at the Open University. Juste pour retourner au français, c'est une institution absolument géniale, mais je ne peux pas en parler. Je vais faire bref. I heard her for the first time a very long time ago, also when I started knowing Hélène, discussing her Hippocrates' Woman Reading the Female Body in Ancient Greece, published in 1988. At the time, she said to be happy to be able to work on the things that she found both amusing and interesting. She also claimed that to have suggested to the editor at the time to call the book The Classical Period in order to sell more books. So, since she has brought to light and explained an important body of text related to woman with opening the body of fluids, taking in and pouring out in the Renaissance reading of classical woman, as well as many other books about women. I would especially want to emphasize the One Sex Body on Trial, the Classical and Early Modern Evidence, published in 2016, is a careful study of the sources classical and their reception in reaction to Making Sex, Body and Gender from the Greeks to Freud, published by Thomas Laqueur in 1992. Helen's book will be central to the whole conference, as well as The Body Beyond Laqueur, Hippocratic Sex, and its rediscovery, published in 2020. Another stimulating avenue of her work is linked with modern claims to go back to the ancient wisdom, including that of Hippocrates, with treating the patient, not just the disease, published in 2020, or also Hippocrates Now, the Father of Medicine in the Internet Age, published in 2019. Currently, she's working on a history of the female body and is trying to communicate both the interesting and the amusing to an audience of non-academic readers for profile books. Today, she will be delivering a keynote lecture entitled From Print to Wool, Vesalius and the Nicked Your Own Womb Movement. Thank you, Helen King, for your fascinating work.
Thank you, Hélène.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Anne-France, and particularly thank you for remembering a joke I told a very long time ago. It's true, I did want to call that book The Classical Period. Okay, let's get to the exciting bit. It's going to be the trigger warning. Hélène yesterday did a trigger warning, and obviously there's going to be one here too. This paper contains sexual content and references to childbirth and dissection of the kind that make me feel slightly ill. So if you have problems with those, now may be a good time to go somewhere else. Massive thanks to Hélène for organizing this event, and massive thanks to Emmanuel for translating my paper and making it so much better. I don't think it's only that everything sounds better in French. I think he actually understood what I was saying, even when I didn't. So that is pretty impressive. Okay, without more ado, we get to the exciting moment where I attempt to share the screen. It should be working. I'm hoping you can now see
It works. It works very well.
All we need to know. Good, thank you very much. So, I've been working on the history of gynecology for many years now, mostly focusing on the fluid body. The ancient Greek idea that the body is dominated by a series of fluids, excess of any one causing disease, and balance being associated with health. In the fluid body model, organs aren't very interesting. They're just interchangeable containers for fluid, collecting it, storing it, and pouring it out as appropriate. Recently, however, I've been starting to think more about the organs. And because of my existing interest in women's bodies, that's mostly meant thinking about the womb. In my study of how the female body has been imagined, I've gradually moved out of the ancient Greek world into the Renaissance and beyond. And today, I'm also moving into the 21st century. As part of my work, I've been considering the materials of which organs are constructed, or images of organs are constructed. Over the history of Western medicine, wombs have been made in terracotta, wax, papier-mâché, wood, metal, and rubber. My main way in, though, has been mostly through considering knitting and stitching. Knitting body parts is a feature of our times. I'm not sure how far this practice extends. I'm focusing today mainly on the United Kingdom and the United States of America. There is an interesting challenge for the designer in converting flesh into wool, wet into dry, finding the right colors and the right textures. Creating knitted body parts is made much easier by the internet. Websites for knitters not only share patterns, but also discuss at great length these questions of color and texture and what is the best wool to use. The challenges faced are not very different from the challenges for other forms of three-dimensional representation. Wax, for example, is a particularly powerful medium because since the early modern period, it's been used and colored to appear lifelike, but also wax appears wet. The contrast between the apparent wetness of an 18th century wax organ and the dead dryness of a body part from Gunther von Hagen's Body Worlds exhibition, the smaller image, is very striking. I'm showing here Clemente Susini's Anatomical Venus from Florence, restored and shiny. Weirdly, von Hagen's use of real dead bodies treated by his plastination process can be less upsetting than an artistic creation in wax, just because wax looks more wet. Before looking at knitting, I want to set it in the context of earlier ways of imagining the materiality of the body. One method, of course, was the printed illustration. When Andreas Vesalius commissioned the famous illustrations of the interior of the body for his 1543 Fabrica, he was restricted to 2 dimensions and to black and white. For the female body, Perhaps the best known illustration is figure 27. To us today, it looks more like a penis than a womb. That's partly because it has been cut in such a way that it's nothing like what we expect to see. Today, we illustrate the womb with fallopian tubes and ovaries because we see this as one structure, one part. And there's a bigger issue here about what counts as a body part. While the work of Herophilus in 3rd century BCE Alexandria had revealed the tubes and the ovaries, their function was not understood. Furthermore, in the model of the body used in the ancient world, the vagina was in no way a separate part. Instead, it was the neck of the womb. The way this body has been cut by Vesalius focuses on the womb, vagina, and external genitalia as a single structure. The caption and Vesalius's references in the main text to figure 27 make it clear that for him what's important isn't what we see, this penis-vagina parallel, but the emptiness of the womb. It has been cut to show there is nothing in it. This means that the woman from whom it was taken was executed according to the law, which stated that a pregnant woman could not be executed. It was necessary to wait until she'd given birth to the baby. So maybe we shouldn't see this as a generic womb image. It's a specific womb of a specific woman. The dissector here supports the verdict reached by the midwives called in to judge the still living body. Their verdict that this woman was not pregnant. Not pregnant, unlike many of the other images of the body, such as Susini's anatomical Venus. Wombs are usually pregnant. You can see the baby in the womb here. Elsewhere in Vesalius's Fabrica, in the whole body images, a male cadaver strides through the landscape around the city of Padua, gradually losing bits of his body as he goes. There are very few illustrations of the female body in Vesalius, as the male is used to show the general human body, and the female is used only to show the organs of reproduction. In the smaller images illustrating the text, however, both the male and female body are seen as if made from cold stone, using the broken statue style. One interpretation is that this is a deliberate reference to the classical past, and the reusing of the Belvedere torso, discovered in Rome in the late 15th century, supports this view. The missing parts also act to remove any sense of the individuality of the original human model for each image. Was there one person, or are these all an amalgam of many cadavers? But disturbing hints of individuality sometimes survive. In the female body on the right of this slide, over the woman's left shoulder, there's what could be a piece of hair or could be a rope from when the woman was hanged, because execution was the source of Vesalius's bodies. Turning now to three-dimensional wombs. These are a feature of 18th century obstetrical education, and they were used to demonstrate birth positions and difficult deliveries. It can be hard to see the woman here at all, as the womb takes center stage. If the woman is there at all, it's as the remains of an amputated pair of legs. Although maybe this top image of a glass womb used in Bologna to train men and women practitioners is less disturbing than on the right of the slide, William Hunter's very butchered pregnant section of a woman from his gravid uterus of the late 18th century. The glass wombs are there because the trainee midwife or obstetrician could be blindfolded, then try to work out from the sense of feel, of touch, what was happening in there, while the rest of the trainees watched and sympathized. Wood was also used, as in this mixed media French model on the left by Pierre Constant Boudin and Alphonse Pinard, first described in 1877, with a latex abdomen and a latex womb containing a dead fetus and some water. The more expensive model included a screw on the back, which changed the curvature of the spinal column. On the right, you can see a softer material, cloth on its own, although sometimes a real human pelvis was used as the base. The controversial element here was the baby. There was much debate about whether a cloth one was sufficient, or whether the best method was to use a preserved stillborn child. You can see that print, glass, and wood, and cloth are all giving a similar message. The focus is on the baby and removing it successfully, rather than on the mother's womb. By the 19th century, rubber was also being used. The glass wombs of the 18th century could include fluids, used to give a sense of the fluids of birth, but rubber had even more potential. These media could be used in mannequins, such as this one, also known as phantoms, where a complete woman was modeled. This 1890 illustration of one made in Germany was something exhibited at the Obstetrical Society of Philadelphia in 1889. I find the presence of a face and of clothing very disturbing here. But the use of stockings is something also found in models used in the 18th century. One possible womb to accompany this mannequin was made of rubber, with what is apparently also a rubber cervix, which could be tightened and loosened, the finished result looking like this. The mannequin also included a rubber rectum. The pouch on the side of the womb could be filled with water to give the impression of amniotic fluid. But back to knitting. Working with fabric, from weaving to embroidery, has in the West been understood as women's work and as part of a woman's household tasks, at least until the rise of the factory. But there's something even deeper in our psyche about wool and women. In the Hippocratic medical texts, in terms of the texture of their flesh, woman is like raw wool. Man is like the finished garment. Hand knitting has a long history, most commonly done as a source of income or as a way of saving money on clothes. We knit to keep warm. In our current culture, it's often about baby clothes. The earliest examples of knitting in Europe are often not knitting at all, but something done with just one needle called nullbinding. This is a very, very early fragment, which is not knitting, although it looks like it. There have been some changes over time in Western history about how knitting has been gendered and how it's valued. This is similar to how in the medieval world, men and women worked together in embroidery workshops. But by the 18th century, embroidery was gendered as exclusively female, one of the accomplishments an elite woman was supposed to demonstrate. Rosika Parker's book, The Subversive Stitch, was first published in 1984 and has been reprinted and issued in a revised edition. She shows how embroidery was the proper occupation of a woman throughout Western European history, but also how it came to be reused by women activists, such as the suffragettes, for their own purposes. But the use of knitting in the 21st century seems to be something very different. The knit your own body parts movement changes the whole tone of what's being done, as I shall show. A key aspect is the properties of wool itself, in contrast to other ways of presenting the womb. As we already saw, wax looks wet, thus persuasively and disturbingly lifelike. Wax doesn't even look professionally medical, just worryingly real, thus disturbing for the viewer. Knitting, even of internal organs, is always going to look soft, friendly, and accessible. This is a womb currently used in UK parent craft classes, based on a pattern offered by the National Childbirth Trust in the 1960s. The earliest use of something like this is in around 1940, in a teaching demonstration at the American College of Surgeons, reported in Time magazine for that year. A balloon or beach ball is put into the womb with a smaller hard ball in the cuff. Elastic can be threaded through the bottom and top of the cuff. If you palpate the large ball, the top of the small ball will appear to represent dilatation of the cervix. As the cervix dilates, it also becomes thinner. This is something which could not be seen by students in any other way, as it's happening inside the body, invisible to them. The properties of wool are an appropriate way of imitating the properties of the body. The instructions on the pattern for knitting a womb go on. No attempt should be made to give this visual aid a lifelike appearance. It will probably be more acceptable to classes if knitted in plain colours, possibly buff or oatmeal, not bright colours. Yesterday we heard from Matt about Danny Johnson's 3D printed clitorises in many very bright colours. And I'm pleased to say for this womb that Sue Tully, a midwifery lecturer at Bournemouth University, went for pink instead. In an article in the Guardian newspaper in 2013, the journalist Suzanne Moore described her experience of attending antenatal classes. She says the midwife taking these had knitted a uterus. She apologized for the fact that it was navy blue, as she had run out of pink wool. The plain knit was the uterus. The ribbed sock bit was the cervix. She then proceeded to push a tennis ball through it. That, she said, was birth. Here, that navy blue uterus recalls another series of images online using not a ball, but a Cabbage Patch doll. These are very practical wombs. But today, the main use of knitting and crochet is not by professionals, but by ordinary women, for ornamental purposes, sometimes for therapeutic purposes, but often to challenge negative images about the female body and to empower women to be confident about their wombs. Knitting is no longer utilitarian, done to keep warm. As noted by Beth Ann Pentney in a 2008 article asking, are the fibre arts a viable model for feminist political action? Books on knitting can have an ironic tone and kitschy visuals. Knitted body parts for which patterns are widely available online include gifts to cheer up a woman who has had surgery a hysterectomy, or the removal of an ovarian cyst. One such knitted womb was named Ursula Uterus. Canadian feminist Beryl Tsang's Titbits were created after her mastectomy. She wanted to find a breast prosthesis, but thought the one she bought looked like raw liver. So instead, she decided to knit her own and wear it with one of her favorite bras. She encourages other women to knit a personal prosthesis. This means women are not dependent on the commercial medical market. Knitted body parts often challenge the lines between art and craft, between personal and public. An example of knitted body parts created as art would be this work by Chris Zantis, an artist living in Australia, who in 2011 exhibited the Domestic Goddess installation, which combined cookery, here woman-shaped biscuit cutters, with vulvas. These art objects, though, are not my focus today. I'm concentrating on ordinary women using knitting for their own purposes. When it comes to knitted wombs, these all go back to the first body parts pattern offered by Knitty.com in winter 2004, created by the knitter and crocheter M.K. Carroll. The designer noted of this womb that it's not completely anatomically accurate. I've taken a few liberties with the general shape and scale, as well as leaving out the ligaments connected to the ovaries. And of course, the human uterus is not normally bubblegum pink. You've already seen a lot of pink used for women's body parts. As the feminine color, this is often used in an ironic way. The instructions for this womb include stuff body until it feels firm but cuddly. Cuddly, okay. Not a word one would often use in connection with the womb. And no ligaments. This choice makes this womb more like a Hippocratic one, free to wander around the body, or actually beyond the body. This wandering womb model has been a powerful one in the reception of the ancient body in medicine from the medieval world to today, not least because it's so alien to us now. And M.K. Carroll refers in her own work to such popular understandings of the classical medical tradition. She wrote in 2007, 3 years after the pattern, Hippocrates coined the term hysteria and thought that it was caused by the womb traveling around the body in search of children. This womb will be doing her traveling outside of my body. I include for comparison here an ancient votive womb, another sort of portable body part. The Hippocratic texts, in fact, do not use the word hysteria, but that's not relevant to this particular lecture. Carroll insists that wombs made from her pattern can't be sold. Only the costs of material can be met. If you want to add ovaries, she suggests, and I quote, going with the ovaries your womb prefers. If she wants Swarovski crystals, give them to her. Pearls? Nothing is too good for your womb. The knitted womb brings a sense of fun, of naughtiness, and it's worth spending a few minutes considering that element. It can be seen as part of what was described in 2012 as a new frankness in discussing the female body. In the words of Amy Singer on knitty.blog, why a knitted womb? Because A, it's cute. B, we can. C, it's really freaking cute. And who would ever have thought you could knit a cute womb? But as Carroll's decision to omit the ligaments demonstrates, there are choices to be made in how you create a cute womb. Zabet Stewart's Snatchel makes the womb into a bag, focusing not on Carol's animate and travelling womb, but instead on the aspect of the womb as a container. She has sparkling ovaries and a drawstring which perhaps takes the place of the ligaments. Her womb not only includes the ovaries, it also has more sense of the vagina and includes the labia and some pubic hair. Describing this, she noted that she, quote, can't take credit for the clever name, however. That was Eric from our Stitch and Bitch group. I called it something uninspired and utilitarian, like vagina bag or vulva purse. Thank the universe for Eric. There's nothing worse than a utilitarian vulva. She may not be pretty, but she's mine. The instructions for the Snatchel include this. Now, labia minora vary greatly from woman to woman. I did a single round of single crochet and randomly placed 1 or 2 chain stitches in between the single crochets as I went around. This gave my labia minora a ruffled, irregular look. If you want your labia minora to protrude past the labia majora, as women's do, you might want to try 2 or 3 rounds of single crochet. If this is the case, I recommend only adding random extra chain stitches on the top row. This anatomical precision with knitting is very beautiful. These knitted wombs raise questions in my mind about votive body parts from the ancient Mediterranean. How far are they generic? How far personalized? The ones made in a mold are clearly produced en masse, but these are just the ones which survive. Martin Söderlind has studied votive heads from central Italy, noting it's possible to estimate how many were made, maybe more than 200, by looking at more or less blurry heads produced over the life of one mold. In those heads, the back was handmade while the front was not. Some had traces of paint, hair in a dark color, red for male faces, white for female faces, red for the iris, black for the pupil. These are mass-produced and marketed, but they have the potential for personalization by the individual dedicant. I'm not aware of any traces of paint on these wombs, but it was at least possible to paint them. And even if originally generic, once you buy one to present to the god or goddess, does it become my womb? And are they ever fun? The amazement at a cute womb, also picked up in Stewart's "She may not be pretty, but she's mine," is clearly a reaction against contemporary women's unease about the appearance of their body parts. Is this historically contingent? It raises questions about how little we know about women in the past in terms of their attitudes to their own bodies. What would an ancient Greek woman have thought, seeing wombs on display in a temple? If these are wombs rather than just generic container organs, but that is another discussion. While knitted female body parts started off as fun, as because we can, as well as educational, they're now increasingly politicized. They're part of what's been called craftivism, the use of craft for political or social causes. This includes radical knitting, where objects such as army tanks are covered in pink crochet squares, pink again. An American campaign in 2005, Knit for Choice, or Wombs on Washington, aimed to leave knitted wombs at the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. to protest against threats to restrict access to abortion. However, this never took place, not least because of divisions in the organizing group. In the US 2012 government Free VJJ campaign, Knit Your Congressman a Vagina, VJJ being an abbreviation for vagina, the slogan was, if they have their own, they can leave ours alone. Under Who Are We, the movement states, we are women, we are strong, we are smart, and we have a sense of humor. The 2011 to 2013 Felt Cervix project both attempted to think about the cervix and cancer of the cervix, and to encourage women to vote for political candidates committed to women's reproductive rights. The combination of humor and a political message is also found in this patchwork quilt made by the UK's Shoreditch Sisters, a modern WI, Women's Institute, one of a series of local groups more traditionally associated with making jam. The Shoreditch Sisters link their Patchwork Vulva project to raising awareness of female genital mutilation and attacking the cult of the designer vagina, as well as rejecting what they call the stigma and disgust people have for our natural organs. After a day of making these at the Women's Library in London, they blogged, I have honestly never said the word vagina so many times in one day, only to be reminded afterwards that the vagina is technically the inside bit and we were making vulvas, the exterior bit. I think that comment is interesting. What are the right words? Which words can be spoken? Which words have power? And it also reminds us how words can change their meaning, as in classical Latin, vulva can mean womb. Like the creation of the vulva quilt, the Whitstable Profanity Embroidery Group is partly about building community for women. It was founded in 2014 and took its inspiration from this image of an elderly lady embroidering "fuck the world" on a cushion. They meet every month in a local pub where they drink, stitch, and chat. No prior skills are required. In Pentney's terms, this is creativity in spite of artistic skill or training. As well as embroidering swear words, they work with slang terms for parts of the female body. In 2019, they were featured on a TV series, All Women, and described as a punk version of the WI, the Women's Institute. A former colleague of mine, Kim Shahabuddin, sells simple cross-stitch kits of single words with sexual connotations in a similar tradition, marketed as smut and tut. Smut being something indecent or obscene, and tut-tut being what one says to express disapproval. The New Vagina Museum in London also sells patterns for knitting or crocheting various body parts, amongst them these clitorises. The history of women as producers of fabric not only goes back a very long way, but also comes with a sense of women's craftiness, both their role as producers of craft work, but also craftiness in the sense of their cunning. Dora Wheeler's famous silk piece, Penelope Unraveling Her Work at Night, famously presents Penelope both as a model of fidelity, loyal to her absent husband Odysseus, and of deviousness. She has sworn to choose one of the suitors to marry, but will only do this when the shroud she is weaving is finished. Beth Ann Pentney commented, if second wave feminists have been historicized as women who put down their knitting, third wave feminists may be characterized as those who have picked it back up again. And when it comes to the female organs of generation, sisters are knitting them for themselves. This means making choices about what we show and how we show it. These choices can come from our textbook knowledge of what we ideally look like, but these images appear cold, unfriendly, produced for narrow educational purposes. But wool is friendly. Wool is cute. It also strikes me that the images of the womb I've shown in textbooks, wood, glass, rubber, are disembodied, focus narrowly on the need to extract the baby from the womb. And contemporary knitting and crochet projects often disembody the womb once again. By thinking of the womb or the cervix as a part rather than as the self, this may, for instance, make it easier to cope with surgery. But at the same time, the materials used, their softness, their color, are working against a social view that these parts are bad. Wombs with friendly little smiles may be a reaction against the view from antiquity that women are deformed or imperfect. In their original context, when Galen, following Aristotle, commented that our creator had purposely made half the human race imperfect and, as it were, mutilated, his whole point was that this meant there must be some advantage in such a mutilation. It's precisely because women are wetter and colder that they are able to provide nourishment for the unborn child. For us today, deformed or less perfect are loaded terms, and possibly what the knit your own cute womb movement is reacting against. For Aristotle and Galen, however, these terms were simply another way of expressing what Rebecca Fleming has called women's critical inability, the lack of heat, which meant they could not make semen. For these ancient writers, the deformity was in the production of fluids, not in the physical appearance of the organs. So to conclude, I've tried to think about some of the choices in how body parts are shown. Where does the womb stop? Does it include the fallopian tubes and ovaries? In its pre-16th century forms, no, it does not just because they haven't been discovered, but they're just not relevant. Does the womb include the ligaments, the vagina, the vulva, the labia? Where are the boundaries of one organ? How do we represent the womb? Do we show it to emphasize its fullness, its emptiness, its possibilities for fullness? Is it shown animate or inanimate? I've also considered the materials in which they can be made and the different possibilities of these alongside the shift from 2 to 3 dimensions. Wool can give a message of accessibility a long way from the operating theatre or the cadaver. I should add here, this is not always the case, even with wool. Emily Stoneking works at what she calls the places where art and science intersect, and has commented, I'm also interested in using cuddly materials like cozy knitting to create objects that many people are usually squeamish about. This means that her anatomy project involves knitted animal dissections. However, the message here is about removing the fear by using the qualities of wool. And I think the Knitted Womb projects also draw on this. Finally, these different wombs raise the question of the purpose of the image or model. Is it created to train a professional or for a professional to use in teaching the public? Or is it something made by ordinary people for their pleasure? It interests me that wool reduces the power of the womb to shock, yet at the same time, knitted wombs are used to shock And I'm thinking here of their political value, where wombs are used as the evidence of female difference in order to prevent legislators from limiting women's reproductive rights. Thank you very much.
Merci, merci Hélène. What a beautiful lecture. Quelle merveilleuse présentation. Merci. Et j'ai beaucoup de questions, bien sûr, mais je vais les garder pour la fin. Je suis sûre qu'il y a dans le public des questions, des remarques, des remerciements. N'hésitez pas à intervenir. Moi, je n'ai plus aucune pudeur Zoom depuis que j'ai enseigné en ligne. C'était très difficile au début, mais maintenant, je sais que ça ne compte pas, que nous sommes des fantômes de notre dignité. Personne?
I have a question if nobody else.
Oui, non, mais on en profite, hein, oui.
No, I was interested in the use of pearls because I think it's another avenue in a way, because it gives both a sense of the wetness of the womb, and also it gives it a less cute but more glamorous aspect. So I don't know if you have any comments.
No, it's a good no, it's a good observation. It's a good observation. Yeah, glamorous wombs. There's another entire possible section.
Anyway, thank you.
Well, the wet ones are just, I went to an exhibition in London many years ago, the Hayward Gallery, where they had some modern artists' work using wax. So not 18th century, but 20th century. And the wetness was truly extraordinary when you're in its presence. And that was the only point when I felt I needed to leave the room, was actually the wax. I was completely fine on, you know, real body parts in jars and, you know, no problem at all. But wax, it's extraordinary.
Donc, moi aussi, je vais poser une question. Ah, Claire.
No, thank you very much. I love your work, and this was a wonderful talk. As a knitter myself, I was fascinated by the one slide of the knitted breast prosthesis. And there's a local yarn store where I am that has asked people to join in a knitted knocker project where there's a pattern and you can make it in different sizes and create prostheses that will be offered to other women. And it's all very well and good. I just wondered if you have any comment on that. I have to say it made me uncomfortable because when you showed the slide of the artist having made her own prosthesis, I thought, no, that feels right to me. But knitting them for others when it seems so very personal just makes me feel a little queasy, and I'm not sure why I feel that way, but I just wondered if you had any comments.
That's really interesting. I hadn't heard about the Knitted Knockers project. I love it. I love it to bits. But you're right. The point with Betty Tsang was very much that you make your own. And in the process of that, you're coming to terms with your changed body shape. Therefore, no one else can make them for you.
Yes, and they're not generic. They're not generic, you know.
No, they're not generic. They're not generic. And yeah, how do you know what color to do them? How do you, I mean, the size is one thing, but I'm not very comfortable about that either. But I suppose I'm also not very comfortable about the thought of the implants that you can get, which, you know, she says look like real liver, and certainly not good.
Well, there are prostheses that are external that do look like liver, because they are, the ones that I've seen at least, they look, the surface looks like the wax almost. It has a wet look to it.
Right, it's the
So
wetness. That's very interesting.
And it feels slimy.
Yeah, because of course you're right. These aren't implants. These are external. Yes.
Yeah, and the question of implants, of course, is a whole nother story,
with a lot of medical problems attached. Yes. Yeah, that's very interesting. No, thank you for that. It's very useful observations.
If I may, first, thank you again, Hélène. Moi, j'ai eu deux réflexions en vous écoutant. La première, c'est que la laine est élastique et que l'un des grands problèmes de représentation de l'utérus, c'était la variation de taille, la donna immobile. Et donc, c'est aussi un des problèmes pour la reconnaissance de la dignité du corps féminin, par exemple dans les essais cliniques. Donc, et je trouve que, par exemple, le gant utilisé pour les cours d'obstétrique règle la question par l'élasticité et aussi par la laine chinée, enfin l'alliance de couleurs qui était choisie. Donc j'étais très impressionnée par cette solution. Mais la deuxième chose, c'est que moi, je ne sais pas tricoter. Il y a plein de gens qui ont essayé de m'apprendre, mais je suis pas assez concentrée sur ce que je fais. Je perds des points, etc. Et je mesure, lorsque je regarde ces objets, le temps qui est passé par une personne sur la représentation d'une partie de son corps qu'on espère, elle ne verra jamais. Et ça me touche profondément. Chez Berengario da Carpi, on a ce qu'il appelle des matrices qui sont tombées et qu'il regardent, qui continuent à bouger, qui ont une vie après la vie dans le corps. Ici, c'est quelque chose de totalement différent puisque ce sont leurs propres organes sur lesquels elles ont passé un temps qui doit être assez proche de la méditation, non? Et là, c'était ma question. Est-ce que c'est stitching and bitching ou est-ce que c'est stitching and meditating?
Like that. Well, your first comment about the elastic properties of wool, I'm sure it's very important. I hadn't really thought about this until I was reading about the knitted wombs used in parent craft, and that point that the cervix not only stretches but also becomes thinner. So there's a sort of elasticity and also the changes in thickness that are going on there, which make wool very appropriate to show that particular bodily feature. I thought it was very interesting. But I forgot what your second point was. I've forgotten your second point. There's no good. I'm thinking about the first
stitching
point.
and meditating.
Stitching and bitching. Yes, rather stitching and meditating. Yes. So I think this is because wool and other sorts of craft work do seem to be used more and more as a way for women to displace anger, if you like, hence the bitching. So meeting other women, sharing experiences, and then displacing your anger in, you know, making an extremely rude patchwork quilt or something seems to be a very, very powerful way of dealing with these things. But then that's, in our culture, we tend to deal with things by talking therapy, but also by group activities. You know, you go to a self-help group, you have a health problem, you don't sit at home meditating, you go to a group and meet other people with it. Of course, it may not be helpful for everyone. You know, some people find great benefit in the bitching aspect, in the group activity, others really don't. I know when I was recovering from hysterectomy, I did a cross-stitch project with a mouse with a big red balloon, which he was holding, it was sort of floating away. And for me, that was my womb. So that was my meditation. That was very much a stitch and meditate project. I really wasn't in a state where I wanted to talk about it to another group of people, but it helped me enormously. So yeah, stitching and meditating, I like that.
Well,
Probably
thank
hasn't
you.
answered that at all, but it's really interesting.
No. That's such an interesting topic, and also there is something very comforting.
Yes.
Like a hot water bottle. I was thinking of the and comforting but provocating too. You were talking about these bright colors that Danny Johnson could put on our little clitoris models, and I'm smiling when I'm thinking of the episodes that Matt was evoking. People taking the objects, so they were in baskets. I would give them away, and they would take them, and then they would hold them and say, "Oh, what is that?" And or I could do that with this. So what is that? And I would say, "Oh, that's a clitoris. That's roughly the average size." They would drop it, and or I had. Or they would say, "Oh, which color is yours?" or things like that. But there was a transgression there, transgression from inside to outside, and from shameful parts to public parts. And I find that very much in your little wandering womb on the keyboards, on the keys of the piano. That's funny, but it's also because it's displaced, it's inappropriate too.
There's also one version of that knitted uterus where the knitted uterus is knitting a uterus. So with the fallopian tube, it holds needles, and so it's completely self-referential.
That's lovely.
I thought you'd like that.
Oh yes. But I wouldn't dare asking anyone to knit my own uterus. So that's
There's a lovely comment in the comments in the chat from Positive Sex Ed about a project in Marseille called La Chatte en Mousse, which sounds absolutely wonderful.
Magali, do you want to speak about that?
Hi. Yeah, I don't know if I can speak about that, but I've never followed the workshop, but it was an amazing weekend experience that was happening in France. She came to Montreal, but I wasn't in Montreal at that time. And like, it was a group of uterus owners getting together for the weekend and basically like exploring their genitals and like creating from fabric and foam and like whatever there had on ends. So it was really an appropriation of the body through like the creative process of, I don't know, knitting and sticking stuff together. And it was actually really inspired from the 70s movement of self-observation. And Rafa, who was organizing this, has actually been publishing an excellent anatomy manual for the family Planned Parenthood in France, where she actually brought up some things that are not present in a traditional anatomy book, like the female prostate and like the canals that comes out around it. That is something that is not talked about, that is not visible in anatomy, and that came out of the workshop by just seeing it on people and like talking about experience with female ejaculation. So yeah, fabric is really like a vector of knowledge and sharing knowledge, and that's all I can say right now.
Great example.
And yeah, thank you, Magali. Kim Daly is teaching health science at the University of Victoria. Kim, do you want to talk?
Yes, I just had an observation. One thing I think about the wool is not only it's cute and accessible, but it's also really playful.
Yes.
And I can't help thinking about the connection between playful and pleasure and desire. And I wonder if that's part of the point that the women are making that I think is really important.
Yes, I think that's a great point. It fits with that, you know, there's nothing, who wants a utilitarian vulva?
No, I mean, it's for fun.
It is very much about pleasure. I'm sure you're right. I could do more to emphasize that. It's a great point. Thank you.
Vanessa?
Oui, bonjour. Merci beaucoup, Hélène, pour cette formidable conférence. Moi, j'avais une question. Toutes ces représentations sont des représentations d'utérus ou de vulve que l'on pourrait peut-être considérer d'une certaine manière comme validistes, c'est-à-dire elles font des organes féminins quelque chose de mignon, de joli, de beau, de valorisant et de valorisé. Et moi, ce qui me frappe, c'est que toutes les représentations, quelles qu'elles soient, respectent toujours l'intégrité complète des organes qui sont montrés. Et je me demandais s'il y avait des groupes ou des formes, notamment d'activisme politique, qui justement s'emploieraient à tricoter des utérus amputés, avec un ovaire ou des organes avec un ovaire et pas deux, ou donc, que sais-je, pourquoi pas peut-être des utérus de femmes trans qui ne sont pas réalisés de la même manière. Voilà, moi, ce qui me frappe, c'est ça finalement. Oui, ils sont beaux, ces utérus et tout ça, mais ils imposent quand même une forme de norme, j'ai l'impression, dans ce que doit être malgré tout l'appareil féminin, voilà, intègre, voilà, entier, si j'ose dire. Et du coup, je crois que si c'est ça, il manque quelque chose de... Ça manque son objet et une forme de représentation du réel.
I think that's really interesting. I don't know anyone who's attempted to do organs which are less than the norm. Certainly no attempt to do a trans womb I know of, no attempt to do someone with only one ovary, or indeed, I can't remember what the technical term is, the term for the double womb, where you have, the womb is divided into two chambers, which could make impregnation difficult and so on. I'm not seeing one of those either. That would be quite easy to do. So you're right, they are following a textbook norm, even though they're doing it in a warm, friendly, woolly way rather than a cold, black and white, two-dimensional way. Yes, you're absolutely right. So there is something there which is not, you know, it's not as playful, not as radical as we think when we make them. Yeah, thank you. It's very helpful.
I really liked this question and your answer, and I still have a question.
Oh, by the way,
I still have a question about that.
All the nurses said bicoordinate uterus. Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah. That's the one I'm looking for. Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. We have nurses and medical doctors in the audience. That's wonderful. Merci Isabelle et merci Anna Julia d'être là. Vous nous corrigez quand on dit des bêtises. So what I'm thinking is that as soon as we enter anatomy and we try to use the words of anatomy and to learn some of the science, I would not touch a body, but I read the books and I look at the images. Then there is this problem that we have representations on one page of organs that are supposed to be the organs of everyone. And that's and very often these bodies have no head and no sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we can do anatomy in another way. I mean, can we do anatomy with scanning ourselves with medical resonance or whatever, and look at our own body and then go to a doctor and say, can you explain what is what where? But then that wouldn't be science, because science has something normative. So I don't know, but that's something that I've been meeting as a wall when I try to think about that.
Yeah, and it's relevant to Vesalius too, in the terms of the question which I mentioned, which other people have looked at without answers, the question about whether Vesalius is showing an amalgam of different bodies to make a sort of average, or whether he's showing individuals. Some individuals and the average are not the same, obviously. One of the things I gained when I went to Gunther von Hagen's Body Worlds exhibition for the first time was the point that some features such as, and again, the nurses will tell us what it's called, the one where your organs are reversed, so your liver is on the other side, and that's in something like, 1 in 10,000 people or something. It was higher than I thought. And you think, gosh, I had no idea there was so much variation within bodies. And those of us who are not medical probably assume that everyone's got all their organs in exactly the same place. And that's not necessarily the case. But again, the medics will have a go at that. But yeah, you're right. It's very interesting.
There is the Pussy Gallery too online, which I find very moving, where women draw their own genitals the way they see them, or the way they perceive them. And they are so diverse. And there is the collection. So I talked about that in the exhibit online. I find that the collective is one of the answers. And I see that Magali writes that you can actually scan the inside and outside of your genitals. But the thing is that, do we relate to a scan as we do to a woolen thing? I mean, because it's also a toy. I mean,
Yes, so do we relate to a scan? I mean, that's another thing which the Von Hagen's exhibition is very useful for. So he also shows the body in slices. So you slice through a real body and you separate out the slices in a way that you would get with an MRI. Just anything that shows slices through the body. We can't actually relate to that. It's very hard when you see that for lay people to understand. It's difficult how you communicate that, but the scanning your own bits sounds absolutely fascinating. I need to know more about that.
Oh, pardon, je vois maintenant que Jacqueline a une question. Jacqueline Vons à Tours. Et Anne, je viens de te voir, pardon. Jacqueline.
Oui, bonjour, j'ai trouvé que c'était très intéressant. J'ai beaucoup appris sur cette façon moderne de s'approprier son corps par des objets. Mais je voudrais un tout petit point qui a été soulevé. Est-ce que c'est le corps idéal? Est-ce qu'il y a différents corps? Je crois qu'effectivement, à partir du XVIIe siècle, moi je ne connais pas bien le monde moderne, mais on va arriver à ce qu'on appelle une série de cas. Et justement, tous les opuscules anatomiques que nous allons lire ne sont plus la description d'un corps idéal, mais une série d'observations faites sur des corps individuels qui restent des observations à titre individuel. Il n'y a donc pas réellement, ce que vous disiez tout à l'heure, de véritables sciences qui se construisent à partir d'une dizaine, centaine d'observations. Et dans les thèses d'exercice récentes encore en France, on avait des thèses d'exercice en médecine qui étaient observations faites sur 15 ou 20 ou 30 patientes. Donc, il y a effectivement quelque chose là qui mérite d'être approfondi. Cet utérus qu'on tricote, est-il l'utérus de Madame Tout-le-Monde ou l'utérus de quelqu'un qui a servi finalement de modèle? Bon, c'est un petit détail. Mais ça remonte aux observations, peut-être.
Je pense que c'est une question qui va revenir sur la table de dissection et sur la table ronde de nos échanges. Parce que en même temps, je pense par exemple au plaisir de ces petits clitoris, de ces petites vulves partout, etc. L'idéalisation rend l'organe douillet, amusant et politique.
Il permet la distance aussi.
Il permet la distance. Quand j'ai mis dans les images une page scannée d'une photo de la dissection de la femme à la specola à Florence. Quand on regarde le petit bout de truc tenu par des épingles qui est censé être le clitoris, on n'a pas envie de porter ça autour du cou. Et pourtant c'est exact. Donc il y a toute cette question aussi de l'exactitude, de l'idéalisation. Il y a aussi la question de la beauté. Il y a de l'art dans ce qu'Hélène nous montre et dans ces images qui sont produites. Et l'art n'est peut-être pas opposé à la science lorsque ça parle de nous. Et je pense à Magali, sur le site de Magali, Positive Sex Ed, il y a des images absolument fascinantes et magnifiques et qui me semblent porter des réponses à ces questions de la norme qui pourrait se substituer à l'observation et aussi du rapport du sujet par rapport à son corps, de l'intérieur à l'extérieur, etc. J'ai trouvé aussi que les représentations que nous montrait Hélène de cette petite souris disséquée et aussi de la femme dans son de l'appareil génital féminin dans le petit moule à biscuits. En fait, toutes ces installations sont magnifiques.
Mais elles sont tellement différentes de l'image des organes féminins et masculins d'ailleurs aussi dans une statue creusée. À la Renaissance, parce que c'est un peu le même principe. On enlève l'organe vrai et on le met dans un contenant qui est peut-être, c'est une hypothèse, pour le valoriser, parce que le contenant est beau, je ne sais pas. Ou pour faire passer le...
Je ne sais pas, oui. C'est passionnant.
C'est le même principe finalement, peut-être que le biscuit.
Oui, avec des proportions normatives.
Ah oui.
Oui. Anne, pardon. Oui, Anne, vas-y.
Oui, moi aussi, je m'interroge sur ces questions d'idéalisation et puis de normes. Et je remercie beaucoup le professeur King de sa présentation. C'était très, très suggestif. Je voudrais juste poser une question. Moi, ce qui me frappe, c'est le statut presque d'ex voto de ces réalisations, comme si ces femmes qui tricotent s'emparaient finalement d'un nouvel artefact pour à la fois valoriser un organe qui n'est peut-être pas exactement le leur, mais dans lequel elles placent des espérances et qui accompagne une forme de réflexion un peu peut-être spirituelle, de méditation autour de l'intime et de soi et de ce qui fait qu'on est femme. Donc voilà, je voulais juste suggérer ce rapprochement peut-être un peu trop religieux, pas vraiment moderne, mais moi ça m'a un petit peu étonnée dans les rapprochements, notamment avec les objets en terre antique.
If I say something else about the terracottas, I'm still not sure if these are uteruses, because I'm sure there's something here about how we think women in the ancient world must have had problems with fertility, which is important in terms of your marriage can end if you don't have children, so you really want to have them, but also maybe too many children, I mean, too much fertility, but there will be problems with fertility. Therefore, because medicine would be able to do very little, we therefore assume that religion is going to be the answer, that people will go to the temple, buy the model of the womb, dedicate it to the gods. But I'm still not sure if those are wombs, or if I still think I'll have a blog post about this on a blog called the Votives Project. I can send in the link at some point. The theory I have now is that I think they are generic containers. I think they can be wombs if you want them to be wombs, or they could be a sort of vein, sort of just your inside, really. They could be your digestive organs, they could be your bladder, they could be any container. Would an ancient Greek woman even have thought about her womb as a separate thing. And this brings us into even more complicated areas. So if a woman consults a doctor, the doctor will tell her that there is this organ inside her which is sort of dangerous and can move around and search for moisture. Will that make sense to the woman? Will she say, oh yeah, that's how it feels for me as well? Or will women resist that model and say, yeah, of course nothing's moving inside my body, don't be ridiculous. You know, this is a static thing. That's where it gets so difficult to reconstruct what an ancient woman would have thought and whether she would have believed what doctors were telling her. Because also there are words like gaster, which we get gastric from. We think of gastric as stomach, but gaster in the ancient Greek context means sort of much more than that. It's partly about digestion. Your food goes to your gaster, but gaster is also the word for the womb, a word for the womb. So it's like one organ that's both taking in food and making blood and making babies. So is that actually, are those terracottas, are they not wombs? They're gasters. They're a sort of mixed reproductive and digestive organ. We don't know, but it seems worth raising that question. Because if we look at a little knitted womb now, we all go, oh yeah, that's a womb, because we see pictures. We have expectations of the norm. Would that work in the ancient world? You know, no one's going to see a picture of a womb. How would they, what would they be expecting? So anyway, great questions, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Helen King, for this wonderful lecture, for your knowledge, for your humor, for the inspiration. Thank you everyone in the public, and especially the brave ones who raised their hand and took the